Hi, everybody, and welcome to Season 2 of the HCD Mindset series of our HCD vidcast for 2021. Today, we have a really fun conversation that we're doing. You're going to get to meet the Spock of Cannabis. So without further ado, let's get through with the intros of us, because we're the boring ones here, and we're going to talk with Darwin in just a second. But just to start out, as usual, introduce who we are. My name is Michelle Niedziela, and VP of Research and Innovation at HCD. And as always, I'm joined by the lovely Kathryn Ambroze. Kathryn.
Hi, everybody. Yep, Kathryn Ambroze here. I'm the manager of Behavioral and Marketing Sciences with HCD, and I'm so excited to have this conversation. I think we have a lot of cool questions ready to ask Darwin, but before we hop into who exactly he is, we're going to hear a little bit about who we are at HCD.
Yep, so HCD Research is a full-service market research house whose approach is grounded in holistic understanding of how consumers perceive, evaluate, and respond to different stimuli around them. That could be products, it could be communications, but we use a range of methodologies to really figure out that whole experience. So the tools that we use could be used on interactions with products, packaging, and communications that consumers have. And we use an applied consumer neuroscience approach in addition to traditional market research approaches that run all the way through the early stages of exploration with products and product development, all the way through validation stages in marketing. Our work can be done globally or in the US. It can be done in person with biometric labs, physiological measures, but it also can be done online. We've been everywhere. We've done it all. We're always happy to talk more about it, which is why we have this series. So again, we're the boring part. Let's launch in with our guest today. Darwin, you have a lot of really cool things going on here. So you're the owner and founder of your own company. You're committee chair, subcommittee vice chair of a lot of things going on with cannabis manufacturing, as well as setting standards for the cannabis area. If you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you get to this point?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Michelle and Kathryn, for having me with you guys. I really appreciate being a guest on your podcast today.
Pleasure is ours.
Well, I'm a mechanical engineer by training, and I specialize in the mechanical and solvent-based extraction methodologies for isolating various terpenolic secondary metabolites from botanicals, which is a fancy way of saying that I know how to make extracts well, and I can. But I've also been working in herbal product manufacturing and helping clients in the cannabis and hemp space, really on every scale of extraction, as well as product manufacturing, achieve their goals according to their budgetary constraints and their scope, their scale of operations, as well as their brand expectations, which I think a lot of people sometimes overlook. And like you said, I'm the subcommittee co-chair for ASTM International's D37.07 on Industrial Hemp, as well as the subcommittee vice chair for the D37.04 on cannabis processing and handling, and the chair for the Cannabis Manufacturing Committee at NCIA for the 2020-2021 term. So I have a lot of hats and trying to just help promote the cannabis plant and all of the products that can be produced from it in all of its forms.
So you're not busy at all. That's what I'm getting from this.
Well, if I'm not working with clients, I am actively writing standards that will hopefully shape the global marketplace for decades to come.
That's awesome.
These are pretty new committees, right?
ASTM International's technical committee, D37, has actually been around for the past 4 years. It got founded in the spring of 2017. So we're officially 4 years old. Yay!
Hey.
And NCIA has been, NCIA has had its various committees for a while now. The Cannabis Manufacturing Committee, I believe, was product manufacturing before, but it has since evolved over time.
And can you just really quickly explain for anybody who doesn't know, what is ASTM?
Yeah, of course. ASTM International is one of the oldest standards development organizations in the world. So next to ISO, which is the International Standards Organization, ASTM International produces standards that really affect everyday life and commerce to help promote product quality, as well as ensure environmental and consumer health and safety.
I see. And I just am curious too, is there a difference? Now you call it a standard. It's not law though, right? So it's just like people are suggesting this is what you should be upholding, right?
That's a great question. A lot of people have questions in regards to, what's the difference between a regulation or a standard? And in this case, the easiest way to whittle that down, depending on what type of standard you're talking about, is regulations tell you that you have to do something, right? It's mandated, it's in law. Whereas a standard would be something that would be written to tell you how to do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. And so how did you, when did you first enter this area, this whole market?
You mean cannabis and hemp?
Yeah.
15 years ago, immediately out of college. It was either, as a mechanical engineer, it was either build slurry pumps for the fracking industry or dive headfirst into cannabis, Colorado's fledgling medical cannabis industry at the time. And I wouldn't change anything for the world.
It's a pretty exciting leap to make, because it was so new at the time. So, really getting into it was a bit risk taking, but also following, I guess your heart, right? Because it's something that was more exciting and really interesting to you.
Well, I've been a consumer for a while and into mechanical separations and making water hash, old school bubble hash, and all sorts of things, and kind of starting those trends along with counterparts in the industry with Nick Tannum from Essential Extracts and others. So really being in kind of the space right from the beginning. So it's been an exciting, fun ride for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a lot of changes in the past 15 years. Like you said, it's 4 years old now, these committees. And so, that's a huge step, right?
Well, I think it's a natural evolution for the marketplace to start wanting to mature a little bit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, absolutely. Now that we're starting to see recognition and adoption of these standards, and we're starting to see the marketplace really starting to look into topics like sustainability more legitimately, questions related to testing and quality management, they're being approached in a different way than, say, they were a few years ago. So I think, it's only natural for our marketplace to want to start, especially the stakeholders who are operating at this and don't want to lose their licenses, to start creating standards that are market relevant and are voluntary. In this case, that's exactly what ASTM International does.
Yeah,
and has been doing since 1898.
Oh my goodness. That's great. And I think, the thing about that is, though, that I think with this maturity, as products are becoming more mature and, more accepted in the general consumer marketplace, that comes with a lot of complexities, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess when we think about these standards and the overall market, can you tell us a little bit more about how that's working out for cannabis to be this really a much more accepted commodity?
Sure. Well, I think the easiest way to explain kind of how that's happening is go over the 6 types of standards that ASTM International creates. So, when I'm talking about standards, I'm talking about 6 practical documents that are created. Those are standard terminology related to an industry or a field. So you set a certain terminology that everybody or nomenclature that people will be using. And then we have specifications that, physical properties, chemical properties, other quality attributes of things that are defined, and then test methods that would verify that something actually meets those specifications. So it could be classified as something. So for sure it is in fact that thing it says it is.
Yeah.
And then guides and practices that allow you to then actually meet and comply with those specifications in order to produce products that can be fall under those various classifications that we are creating standards for. So that's kind of how they work, and establishing that legitimate structure allows us to promote the acceptance of these products across various global marketplaces and encourage really the true commodification of this green economy.
That's really interesting because, you know, I'm less familiar with the cannabis economy, but more with flavor and fragrance and foods and stuff like that. And I worked at a large chocolate company for a while, and something I found really interesting where like the standards in the US for chocolate has to do with like the percentage of cocoa actually used. So if you don't use cocoa butter in the US and you instead use veg oil like they do in Europe, it's not actually considered chocolate in the US. It's actually considered chocolate flavor. So, you know, sometimes you look at a chocolate product on the shelf and it says chocolate flavored candy when it's a bar of chocolate, right? So, and that's really always surprising to people, I think, when you talk to the general consumer, because they don't always read that fine print or they don't understand these standards. Is there something kind of similar, like an interesting little factoid like that, that you see in cannabis and in making these standards?
Well, you know, we're not as mature as chocolate, but that's a great example of standards, right? How one marketplace's standard for what is chocolate is vastly different for another marketplace's. Hence why you might project a certain quality level to maybe German or Belgian chocolate, because, you know, it adheres to such a higher standard than, you know, the chocolate in the United States, which, you know, in most places, actually, I would argue, they consider our chocolate not to be chocolate.
But oddly enough, we contain more chocolate in it.
Fun fact of the day.
Yeah, fun fact of the day. But yeah, it's a really interesting point, which is why you end up having these differences in the marketplace. And it definitely affects perception, right? Or maybe how you perceive things to be, because certainly chocolate in Europe is creamier, and it seems like that has a lot to do with the veg oil that's used instead of the cocoa butter. But, you know, do you see these differences, you know, here as well?
In regards to cannabis products?
Yeah.
Well, so going back to your question in regards to maturity of the marketplace, no, because our market hasn't yet matured to where there's really a significant difference between one type of thing over another. A good example is that we don't have one type of grading system for the flowers of the cannabis plant to determine what's a high quality, what's a low quality, what is like adult use versus medicinal use. We don't even have those basic specifications yet. We're working on them. And so as a fledgling industry, really, you know, it seems that there are some pockets where there might be some levels of maturity. But when it comes to a larger global marketplace and affecting commerce in a way that allows the easy transportation and distribution of goods across various different marketplaces, we're nowhere there yet.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you then, because it is a newer area that's being explored, are you taking from more established standards that are kind of in place and using them as a skeleton to kind of, you know, direct you into the next steps, since it's
another great question.
Called the Wild West.
And absolutely, because we have a lot of body of knowledge to work from. So there is no need whatsoever for cannabis products to have to take a wholly unique pathway for the development of standards and best practices. We have a lot of examples to work from. So yes, we are using existing standards, existing regulatory frameworks, existing guidance documents as a skeleton to build from, right? It's a great analogy. In fact, I've used before, there is in fact a skeleton and a road, a pathway leading forward for us. All we have to do is kind of put all the guts and ligaments and pieces together so that thing can actually function.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really interesting how, you know, seeing how that's developing is pretty cool. So when we have these new companies coming up and, you know, they're really needing to, they should really consider all these standards, obviously, you know, whether it is more like a mom and pop store or some really established company at making products and OTC products or over-the-counter personal care items, or however any of these things are going to be used. Because I gather that's a little bit of difference too, right? Things that might be used in consumer products versus having itself be a consumer product, right?
Well, absolutely. So using cannabinoids as ingredients in consumer goods that we've seen on the shelves of your grocery store, your natural health food stores, your vitamin cottages, et cetera, those type of things. That's a relatively new thing. I'd say some marketplaces are relatively familiar now with the adult use forms, the pseudo medicinal and medicinal use forms that exist in regards to just raw flower, the herbal material itself, extracts from that, whether they're unrefined or refined, and then preparations from those, whether they're confectionery in the marketplaces that allow them, right, or baked goods or beverages, or if they are more traditional homeopathic forms or nutraceutical preparations. And then, of course, in some marketplaces and some companies that have done the research and have spent the hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to get structure function claims and legitimate medical uses, right? You now have a new, wholly new classification of product and labeling and all those types of requirements, right, for true prescription drugs. So, like I said, I think the marketplace is a little more familiar with that side of it. Yeah. And now that we're starting to see through these hemp avenues into the marketplace, we're starting to see now phytocannabinoid consumer products, right, on the marketplace, or what I would call a resin cannabis consumer product, something that has resins in it, and it's intended to be a consumer product, and it could come from really any type of cannabis plant. So, as I said, it's a wholly kind of new thing to start seeing that on the marketplace. And these mom and pops, or the people who are coming at this from the CBD side first, so to speak, they're just looking at trying to get into the marketplace as quickly as possible, right? They don't want to get that fear of missing out, right? They don't want to have that happen to them. They want to be in it. And they're making mistakes along the way, right? They're making mistakes that some of the larger consumer product manufacturers and OTC manufacturers had made 50, 100 years ago, right? And in fact, because they made them that far along, they actually wrote these rules and these regulations that are now affecting their marketplace, right? So when they're looking at coming into the marketplace, they're looking at it from a completely different perspective and lens. They have billions of dollars of entrenched market assets with all of these various other goods that they make. So when they're looking at this, they're taking an assessment of, do we, if we mess something up, how many billions of dollars are we losing this year, right? Or how much detrimental impact to our consumer brand did we do? Very much, like the Dominion thing going on right now, right? They're suing for libel for multiple billion-dollar suits because effectively their name has been completely run through the dirt and associated with bad business practices, even though they didn't do anything wrong related to election fraud, right? So if you're making claims like that, so again, you're taking different approaches into the marketplace on how to protect your market interests. And so it's an interesting thing seeing the larger players kind of navigating and seeing how they want to come in. You still haven't seen any major plays like that. And if they, at least not under their brands, under, brands that are on a side, and so that they can be an arm's length. And if that thing tanks, they just shed it. Right.
So what are these common mistakes that that they're maybe concerned about? So what are the common mistakes that like the startups are doing?
Well, those some easy ones that I think affect maybe some of your clients right away is using certain ingredients that are listed on the FDA's list of essentially active ingredients that are in other drugs, whether it's OTCs or consumer products or whatever the form of that drug is, once an ingredient has been listed on it, that means, for instance, if you are making a topical product that has certain ingredients in it that are on the list, that automatically takes them out of the consumer product category and into the OTC category, which means you're now filing, you're now squarely manufacturing a drug, and you have completely different regulatory requirements in the manufacture of that and the sale and distribution and labeling and all of that type of thing. So it's using certain ingredients that have known benefits, right? In certain cases, those ingredients are listed, right, as ingredients in drugs. And that, as I said, you're not realizing that this topical you're making or this tincture, for instance, or a dietary supplement or whatever, has an ingredient that is on a list, meaning that it's no longer a dietary supplement. You're manufacturing an OTC, an over-the-counter drug, which means you have to register it's a different business plan, right? And so what that means is that once you start selling your product inappropriately on the marketplace, you're going to get the FTC coming after you because you made money off of that product that was improperly classified and sold on the marketplace. You're going to get the FDA after you because you're selling a drug without substantiated claims or any research to show that it's actually safe to be sold on the marketplace. So they're going to get you. And everybody else along the supply chain of that product, whoever touches it in some regulatory fashion is going to get their money from you, essentially. And
is there a lot of that?
Yeah.
I think that speaks to the need for the terminology to really be constantly being reviewed and up to date.
Right.
There is a level playing field for everyone to understand that, we're literally speaking the same language.
Yeah, because the tinctures are getting the benefit of the health claims that have been done more on an active drug side, right? So when they sell a tincture, it's because people believe it's going to have these clinical effects, even though it is a tincture that's not classified really as OTC. So,
that's the case, right? Of course, you're hoping your consumer is educated enough to know what the presumed health benefits of using your product that can't have any claims associated with it.
Right.
And you can't have links on your website to social media posts. You can't have links on your website that go to articles that say even remotely suggest any type of health claims or benefits. Those are all forms of making claims. It's not just that you said it blatantly. It's that, you provide subtle things, and those are still claims that will get you.
Right. That's interesting because, I think everybody was talking about the Cornell study that was done on pets, right? Using CBD with pets. And, there's just a huge influx of CBD pet products now. So that seems like a really murky area to get into, right?
Well, and absolutely. It's because, it all comes down to the perception of who is operating in these spaces. They already are operating in a space that they want less regulatory burden because this is hemp, not scary marijuana, right? So we want absolutely no regulations on us whatsoever, from the ag level to product manufacturing, because it's hemp and we're special. We're not like everyone else. So because of that mentality, you have people thinking that they can just do whatever they want,
right,
and sell products into the marketplace. So
until they get that slap from the FTC or the FDA.
Right. Exactly.
What's coming soon will absolutely be a massive consolidation of the marketplace there for in regards to operators that are just not. There's not good business practices from the beginning. They're not in this for producing good product. They are in this to ride the green wave.
Right. So do you think that there's an advantage coming from the mom and pop scale or the large conglomerate scale? Like, which one do you think has more of an advantage entry point?
Oh, well, the large conglomerates are not going to come in until it's federally legal because, again, of billions of dollars of entrenched market interest that they would potentially lose.
Right.
So they're not coming in until the federal government says that it's cool. And then they're going to crush everyone because they can do that by just flipping switches. They have the infrastructure and the supply chain management down pat. The only thing mom and pops can do is define a niche and go all out in growing that business and being as compliant as possible, establishing a awesome brand that when the larger ones come on board, they buy you. That's it. There is no opportunity.
They need to be bought.
Yeah, there's no opportunity to become the Johnson & Johnson of this, right? That's not going to happen because Johnson & Johnson and many others, they already exist. They're just going to put $1 billion, which is nothing to them, into it, and boom, done. Just like the tobacco and alcohol companies that are coming in on the, you know, on the funner side of the industry, right? The less, because, and again, it's maturity of the marketplace, right? We've got alcohol and tobacco coming in and what's mature-ish now, right? And that's smokable flower, tobacco, right? And these novel foods, functional foods, these consume to get high products like alcohol.
And I'm curious, is there loopholes almost in a way? Because I know you said, you touching on what you're getting at with the claims, that if you even speak or link anything that's kind of out of line, you get this repercussion that's obviously costly. What if someone was to, you know, use a personal story that they had where they said, oh, that doesn't, so what are you saying no to? Is that
you cannot have a what do you call them when people write on the, like a Yelp review or whatever?
Right,
any of that.
Exactly, like a little antidote, I guess.
That's not allowed.
Yeah,
because that's also making a claim.
Yeah.
So it's very slippery slope. You have to be really careful in this space to really know.
You have to be really cautious because you can't control reviews.
You can't make claims.
Yeah.
Right.
There's no this, that, whatever, cautiousness, play around the bush. You can't make claims. All it is coming down to hoping that your consumer population is educated enough to know that they want to buy your product. That's all you can do.
Yeah.
As an industry, the industry could potentially invest in, like, they could pay the ad council to make an educational campaign as to why you should buy CBD and
then
and then every other cannabinoid, since again the marketplace has no idea what's the difference between CBD, CBG, CBN, CB, whatever, because there's no data. On the macro scale, they all do the same thing.
Right.
On the micro scale, they affect your physiological and pharmacological. I am not, in any way a medical professional, right? But the way that your body works, they affect the way that your body works in different ways, of course. Sure. And some of those could be incredibly beneficial, and some could be extremely toxic. And we just don't know yet.
Yeah.
This is really insightful to realize what is, up and coming, but also the cautions that you have to take really to make it in this space.
Well, not to dissuade anybody. It's just to say that if anyone has told you that this market is ripe for the taking and is super mature, that's just not the case, right? One of you alluded to, or maybe it's something that I had mentioned before, but this is the easiest market to get into, but the hardest to stick with, right? If you've got money burning in your pocket, jump in, have fun. But just because you decided to swim doesn't mean that you're going to make it to shore.
Right. Oh, that's a good way of putting it. No, I think it's really interesting that you brought up some of the individual differences. It's certainly something that we deal with on the rest of the consumer products out there. So really thinking about consumer reactions and the way they rate things and how they experience things is there's a whole science around that, around how to do proper product and consumer testing. Where are we at currently in the cannabis market with that?
I think it's going to be a while till you guys are getting clients who are looking at this in a real legitimate manner, right? Because flower sells, like nobody's worried about that. Extract sells, vape cartridges, right? These are things that are flying off the shelves. The things that might not be flying, right, is when you're trying to compete on the edible side and differentiating yourself from the 17 other super fancy chocolate bars that are next to each other that are all chocolate.
So what?
And you're just like, you're like, cool. Well, which one's the cheapest?
Right, I was going to say that.
Because they all have the same level of cannabinoids that are maxed out, right? If you're in a typical adult use marketplace, excuse me, you know, they've defined it. Typically, it's 100 milligrams, right? So you know that Fancy Bar 1's got 100 milligrams in it, and Fancy Bar 2's got 100 milligram all the way in, right? So now you really are. How do you differentiate yourself, right? If you're in what that level of what you would consider slightly mature and competing within your own marketplace, like within Colorado, and with the various groups that are trying to, you know, carve out that 20% of the consumer marketplace that wants actually, you know, edibles, right? To get that part of the marketplace, you're fighting with, you know, 5 other major leading brands, right? So how do you do that? That's when I think people are starting to finally, you know, think about how you can work outside of the labeling and packaging requirements, right? Because that's effectively, in some marketplaces, the only way people can communicate with their consumer. They're not even allowed to advertise, right? Colorado's, you know, a little more mature in that respect. There are allowed advertisements. You can see, not necessarily like billboards, but you can see outer signs outside, right? That, you know, let you know that that's where this dispensary is. Or if you look through local newspapers, you're going to see full page, you know, ads of various sizes and stuff like that, right? So, but in other marketplaces, there's no advertising at all. So I
think there's still a lot of word of mouth here, you know, because we're not in Colorado. But I think with that.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. Like, do you think that I mean, because a lot of it's word of mouth outside of Colorado, because we're not getting all the advertising and the branding is solely like a trust thing. So do you think there are certain players that are emerging as really kind of having some brand loyalty going on?
Absolutely. And that trusting is really important, right? Because the driver within this marketplace, the consumer demographic, is the cannabinoid dependent consumer. We're talking about those people who are either in a medicinal or adult use marketplace who have to consume it on a daily basis because they, you know, lack of a better way of phrasing it, could die. Or they're a refugee stuck in a marketplace that isn't allowing them to have access. So they are shipping in either illegally or they're desperate to try to find a CBD product that's in their marketplace, right, that can try to provide them with a little bit of care. So the driver who buys this, who's actively looking online for all this information, the CBD you know, the cannabinoid dependent consumer, someone who is beyond just someone who is aware, someone who requires it. People who are aware are like the same place in like the natural health space, right? You know, they're looking for the next chia seed, right, or whatever it is, because they're hip to it, you know, and they're that annoying person who's always telling you about the latest green thing you need to
the superfood.
You know, so you're, you know, that person you're gonna get as well, right? The person who's in and is hip to it, but they're not the one buying. They're not driving sales, right?
Right.
Not yet, because again, this goes back to market maturity. We aren't there where you're seeing these manufacturers don't even understand what stocking fees are.
Right.
So until we get to a point to where they're worried about what their stocking fees are on their bottom line. That said, you know, I think sensory analysis is important in helping us define some of those standards that we've been talking about, right? And helping us create some grading systems that make sense, that are actually usable for the marketplace. So I think we're getting there. It's just slowly but surely, right? And when it comes to product and consumer testing, there just isn't enough of it going on,
Right.
especially when you're starting to see people release different colored THCA crystals out on the marketplace, or you're starting to see Delta 8, edibles and vape cartridges sold legally everywhere, right? Because it's hemp, y'all. But and without taking into consideration product testing, right? A good example I've been trying to put into people's head is if you take aspirin, right, over the counter drug, that has one active ingredient that has of one particular molecule that has multiple forms of itself. It's known as your stereoisomer, right? Your molecule might go this way in one plane, but it could also go this way. It can go in this plane, right? And then it can also be rotated in all of those planes. But when you're looking at it on just your standard chromatograph, it all looks exactly the same. But again, there's only one form of that active ingredient in aspirin that isn't toxic. One form. That's the one that's in the drug. And it took product testing to determine which one of that form, right, is the one that isn't going to cause, massive adverse events. And, there are multiple forms of Delta 8, multiple forms of Delta 9, multiple forms of THCA, and it's quite scary how quickly it goes from someone's head to a packaged product sold onto the marketplace.
Indeed. Yeah. Wow.
I find it really interesting, especially like what you were sharing with consumer trust, even from the point of ensuring consistency among the batches of things that you're getting. Because if something's farmed in Kentucky versus California, you're going to be dealing with a different environment, and there are potential ramifications there. How is, I think about things like how it's being stored, and how, if you're in an area that has maybe a different climate or something like that, that can also affect how its shelf life is going to last.
Yeah. And all these things are checked in other more established markets, right? So again, if you think back to the candies and the chocolates and the other food products, I mean, these things are well-established sections of the company that test all these things.
And so about that, right, with the consumer knowledge base, right, and maturity of the consumer, the next level down from your cannabinoid dependent, your cannabinoid enthusiast or whatever, right, someone in the know, right, is your cannabinoid curious. And that person is who you're really trying to get. That's your larger marketplace, right, who's heard about it every once in a while. They saw the Sanjay Gupta specials, or they're in a marketplace where, they drive by a CBD store, right, and you're like, that consumer, when they walk in, they think they are walking into any other store, that when they do that spontaneous buy or whatever, which is what people most of the time are actually trying to get, right, is that person who didn't create a list. They're just happen to be walking through, and then they go, oh, and they, buy the chocolate bar, right? That consumer thinks the same level of quality control and quality management has been put through the entire supply chain of that product. Right. And is wholly unaware that this marketplace is still a consume at your own risk, is still at the consume at your own risk mentality.
Interesting. Yeah. I hadn't really thought of that, but you're absolutely right. Being in conversations with friends and family that, of course, so many more people now are using the tinctures, really thinking about that quality and consistency that we just expect in any product we buy, right?
Absolutely.
Really interesting.
And it's just not there yet with cannabis or hemp products. Not traditional hemp foods. Those are completely not what we're talking about. That's outside of the scope. Yeah. Those are established, right? They have to follow all the same food rules that everyone else does.
Right.
Just these new products, right, that have these resins in them, these cannabis resins.
So what do you foresee that's going to happen with the maturity of this marketplace?
That's a great question. So when it comes to like the commoditization of phytochemicals, we're kind of like in that stage, at least with the CBD and the others, because people are going big or going home when it comes to hemp, right? Is that we are crashing the market in regards to price. just bottoming. We have way too much supply, not enough demand, back to that market maturity issue, right?
Yeah.
And so we have, the price is essentially gone. But before that's going to start actually, before that instability figures itself out, we're going to have consolidations regarding the fact that people aren't making compliant facilities. Back to those standards we were talking about before. These simple these are now federally legal operations, and which means you have to now recognize that there are many federal agencies that have jurisdiction over your business. And not recognizing that means you're going to have gaps in your operation plan. You're going to have potentially you made poor decisions with buying equipment and other things like that might force you to have to, at worst case, bulldoze a whole facility and build a new one. And that's going to take a lot of players out who just simply can't afford to continue to stay in the marketplace because of continued regulation, right? It's only going to become, again, people are taking for granted, right, the other the other products that are out there. It took a long time to get regulations passed to bring these things up that, our current Congress and other administrations have been trying to chip away and chisel back down so that there are no consumer protections, and because it's bad for business. But now we have the same issues in the cannabis and hemp marketplaces, again, because we don't want to have to deal with overburdensome regulation, and that transition is going to be a bloody fight between lobbyists fighting for people who want to continue to make bad products and people who already paid for the transition, right? So that they could survive the consolidation, pushing to get the dirty players, out.
Yeah. So then how, as a market, do we modernize the way that we talk about cannabis then to kind of continue this conversation?
That's a great question. In my opinion, I think we should be endorsing, that it's all the cannabis plant, it's all one thing. This arbitrary bifurcation of marijuana or hemp based on a set of constituents that varies from jurisdiction, not only in the U.S. but also across the world. That doesn't make any sense, and there should be a more logical, more common sense way of regulating the cannabis plant and its parts and the products that we can make from it. And in my opinion, what I think that is something that's more fit for purpose, something that looks at the intended use of what that product is. And that way, once you've defined what its intended use is, you can look more closely at the intended consumer, what market you're selling into, and then you have clearly defined regulations that are already established that you just simply need to adopt and comply with. So in my mind, that's a much simpler way to looking at this problem, but recognizing that these terms also have market relevance. So continuing to have never suggested that we should start calling like hemp seed oil that you would buy from the grocery store cannabis seed oil. Not yet. People are going to freak out about that for a little bit, right? But that is what it is. That is the oil that was expressed from the seeds of a cannabis plant. You're never going to get around that scientific and technical truth, regardless of what you want to call it in regulation. And so what I've been pushing and proposing within ASTM International's D37 Committee on Cannabis is usage classifications that are fit for purpose, that it just completely ignore the molecular constituents and focuses on how you intend to use the plant or its products. But then also looking at hemp and hemp products as the commercial name for those cannabis products that meet specifications that allow you to be classified, marketed, and sold as hemp.
Nice. Well, on that note, I think this has been a great conversation. I feel like we could talk about this forever because there's a lot to go with here. And maybe we'll be able to do that at some point, because I really enjoyed talking to you, Darwin. Thank you so much.
It was really, insightful.
Yeah, because there's a lot of unknowns here that I think that everybody needs to hear. So thank you for elaborating what you could to educate us on this. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today once again. Please go ahead and hit subscribe so you can get news whenever we have new releases of the vidcast and other things that HCD shares. And feel free to contact us. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can, of course, find us on our YouTube channel. You can email any of us here. Our information is found below. Visit our blog, follow us on Twitter. And again, thank you so much. This is a great conversation once again. So thanks, Darwin. I hope everybody has a great day.
Of course. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Live long and process.
I love it. All right. Thank you.